April 11, 1945, Okinawa. The air stank of fuel and fear. The carrier Bennington trembled under the weight of bomb-laden fighters idling for launch. Beneath Lieutenant Jack Connolly's F-4U Corsair hung a 10-foot rocket that engineers called Genius, and pilots called Suicide. They said it would never fly. They said it would tear the plane apart before it even left the deck. But when he pulled the trigger, that so-called toy would streak across the sky and punch straight through the hull of a Japanese destroyer, proving that sometimes madness wins wars. The sky above the fleet was bruised purple, smeared with the smoke of burning ships. Connolly adjusted his gloves, tasting the oily tang of exhaust in the wind. Below, the Pacific stretched endless and cold, a mirror of steel that had already swallowed too many men. He pushed the throttle forward. The deck crew ducked beneath the prop wash as the Corsair thundered down the carrier's spine. In a single heartbeat, the wheels lifted. The laughter that had once followed every Tiny Tim briefing was gone now, replaced by a silence heavier than flak. During training, the older pilots had joked about it. "Fly with that monster and you'll blow your own tail off," they'd said. Some refused the mission entirely. But orders were orders, and the Navy wanted results. The Japanese were throwing everything they had left: kamikazes, destroyers, even converted fishing boats packed with explosives, at the American invasion fleet off Okinawa. Something had to hit back harder. Connolly levelled at 3,000 feet, the Corsair steady in the humid morning air. The rocket slung beneath his wing made the aircraft sluggish, nose heavy, like dragging an anchor through the sky. Sweat trickled down his temples beneath the leather helmet. Over the radio, a calm voice crackled through static. "Thunder 1 to Thunder 2, sighting smoke, bearing 185, possible destroyer." Jack squinted through his canopy. The horizon shimmered under the haze. Then he saw it, a thin grey silhouette cutting through the waves, guns already swivelling. A Japanese escort destroyer, wounded but still hunting. The ship's black hull glinted in the morning sun, its deck guns barking flashes of orange. Command had ordered them to test the new rocket on live targets. There was no manual, no training video, no margin for error, just Fisa's calm words in the California lab weeks earlier. "Gentlemen, the Tiny Tim will punch through 6 inches of steel before it detonates. Just don't miss." Connolly checked the arming switches. Fuse timer, 0 delay, safety lever, off. A deep metallic hum filled the cockpit. He thought of Fisa then, the bespectacled chemist pacing between blueprints and test stands, sleeves rolled, eyes burning with obsession. The brass had mocked him, pilots had doubted him, but the man had believed every number he wrote. "If it flies straight," Fisa had said, "it changes everything." Below, the sea erupted in geysers as anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Connolly shoved the throttle to the stop and dived. The Corsair shrieked downward, wind hammering the canopy, tracer rounds flashing past in white arcs. The altimeter spun like a compass gone mad. At 1,200 feet he armed the rocket. At 900 feet he aligned the nose. At 700 feet the cockpit shook from near misses. He held his breath and squeezed the trigger. The Tiny Tim dropped free, tail flame roaring to life. The Corsair lurched upward as its burden vanished. For an instant the rocket looked clumsy, wobbling in the slipstream. Then it straightened and screamed toward the target like a lightning bolt made of steel. It struck just below the destroyer's bridge. A column of water and flame shot skyward, towering over the mast. Metal peeled apart. The explosion tore through the ship's magazines, ripping the vessel in half before the sound even reached him. "Thunder 2! Good hit! Good hit!" Jesus Christ, did you see that? It went through the ship. Connolly pulled out low, skimming the wave tops as debris rained behind him. The radio crackled with disbelief. He could barely breathe, his hands shaking, heart hammering. The rocket had worked. The impossible had worked. Back aboard the Bennington, the flight deck crews watched the smoke rising on the horizon. When Connolly's Corsair touched down, no one laughed. Mechanics crowded around the aircraft's empty wing rack, staring in awe. The same men who'd called the weapon a joke now whispered like they'd seen a ghost. Commander Riley met him at the wingtip. "So," he said quietly, "the toy works." Jack nodded, still staring out at the horizon. "Yeah," he muttered. "It works too damn well." That night in the wardroom, the pilots replayed the gun camera footage frame by frame. The rocket's trail flashed white against the sea, then vanished in a plume of smoke. When it cleared, the destroyer was gone. Someone chalked Louis Feezer's name on the board and wrote beneath it, "The man who made aircraft into battleships." Out on deck, Connolly stood alone under a sky scattered with stars, the Pacific glowing faintly below. Somewhere out there, the wreck of the destroyer still burned beneath the waves. He thought of the quiet scientist in California, probably hunched over another blueprint, unaware that his toy had just rewritten the rules of war. Morning came grey and heavy, the sea calm but restless beneath the carrier's hull. The flight deck was slick with dew and oil, littered with spent shell casings from the night before. The Bennington had spent the early hours on full alert. 2 kamikaze raids had come within striking distance during the night. Alarms, flares, the sound of distant impacts. Everyone aboard knew the Japanese were growing more desperate by the hour. Lieutenant Jack Connolly hadn't slept. He sat in the dim ready room, staring at the film reel still stretched in the projector. The final frame, one blurred image of a destroyer's midsection erupting in fire, hung frozen on the screen. A few pilots whispered nearby, voices low and uneasy. The laughter that used to fill these rooms was gone, replaced by quiet respect and fear. On a desk beside him lay the remains of the Tiny Tim test notes, pages smudged with oil, handwritten calculations for thrust curves, impact angles, and fuse delays. Each line represented Feezer's obsession, years of theory that most had dismissed as fantasy. Connolly ran his thumb over one margin note: "Stability achieved through brute force." Not elegance, raw power. That phrase stuck with him. Raw power. That's what he'd felt when the rocket fired. No finesse, no subtlety, just controlled chaos. A weapon that didn't just destroy ships, it tore open the idea that airmen were limited to bombs and bullets. The door creaked open. Commander Riley entered, a coffee mug in one hand and a folder in the other. "You did good work yesterday, Jack," he said, setting the mug down. "The brass upstairs wants details. They're calling Feezer's rocket a proof of concept. You're about to make half the Pacific Fleet very interested." Connolly leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "It wasn't a clean hit," he said quietly. "It was luck." The rocket was wobbling all the way down. Riley smirked. "Luck or not, it's the only thing that's worked in weeks." He slid the folder across the table. Inside were reconnaissance photos, ships massing near Amami-Oshima, part of Japan's outer defensive ring. "Intel thinks they're repositioning destroyers to intercept the landing convoys. Command wants another strike. This time, 2 aircraft, 2 rockets each." Connolly frowned. 2 rockets per plane? We barely stabilized one. Riley took a slow sip of coffee. "Feezer's team swears the mounts can handle it. They've been testing reinforced braces in the hangar all morning. You'll fly again at 1600 hours. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You're officially the Navy's guinea pig." Connolly exhaled sharply and stood. The challenge wasn't fear, it was control. Every instinct as a pilot told him to trust the aircraft, but the Tiny Tim changed that equation. The rocket made the Corsair unstable, sluggish, unpredictable in a dive. He remembered how close he'd come to losing control yesterday, the G-forces, the vibration, the moment when everything went silent before the detonation. As he stepped back onto the deck, Sunlight was cutting through the clouds, reflecting off rows of corsairs lined for refueling. Mechanics moved like ants beneath them, adjusting racks, bolting braces, loading rockets. The smell of fuel mixed with the sharp tang of hot metal. Somewhere below deck, sailors were scraping shrapnel out of a gun turret hit by kamikaze fragments. He found the engineer assigned to his aircraft, a wiry man named Chief Petty Officer Kane, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. "Morning, Lieutenant," Kane grunted, tightening a bolt near the wing. "Heard you made the news." Fleet Command's talking about mounting these things on Helldivers next. "Good luck with that," Connolly muttered. "She's a beast to control. Feels like flying with a torpedo strapped to your ribs." Kane cracked a faint grin. "That's the point, isn't it? Hit 'em before they ever get close." He wiped his hands and stepped back. "You'll have 2 rockets this time, twice the thrust, twice the recoil, but she'll hold together." "Yeah," Connolly said under his breath. "If I do." He climbed into the cockpit and sat in silence for a moment, hands resting on the control stick. The sky above Okinawa was a pale blue streaked with black smoke. Off the port side, another carrier burned from a kamikaze strike, columns of flame twisting upward like flags of defiance. Everywhere he looked, the war was changing shape. Ships no longer ruled the sea, aircraft did. And if the Tiny Tim proved reliable, even battleships would soon be obsolete. As the deck crew prepared for launch, a message came over the loudspeaker: enemy aircraft inbound, possible kamikaze wave. The alarm klaxons howled again, echoing across the steel decks. Pilots ran to their planes, gunners took positions, and the calm morning erupted into chaos. Connolly strapped in, heart pounding. He could see the distant specks growing larger, Japanese planes diving from the clouds, sunlight glinting off their wings. The sky filled with black bursts of flak. He pushed the throttle forward. The Corsair roared to life. The same fear that once came from the rocket now came from the horizon. Above the noise and fire, one thought burned clear in his mind. If this toy rocket could take down a destroyer, maybe, just maybe, it could stop a kamikaze before it hit home. He pulled the goggles down, the deck lights flashing green for launch. The hook released. The Corsair screamed forward. The next test of the Tiny Tim had just begun. The sky over Okinawa had turned into chaos. By midday, it was no longer a sky at all. It was a ceiling of black smoke, drifting shrapnel, and spiraling debris. The roar of engines mixed with the sharp staccato of anti-aircraft guns. Every few seconds, another orange bloom marked a kamikaze finding its mark, or being blown apart mid-dive. Lieutenant Jack Connolly's Corsair climbed hard to 4,000 feet, flanked by his wingman, Lieutenant J.G. Harris. Both aircraft carried twin Tiny Tim rockets under their wings, each one heavy enough to unbalance the aircraft with the slightest slip of the stick. "Thunder 1, this is Thunder 2, Harris called through the static. "You sure these things won't snap us in half?" "We'll find out in a minute," Connolly replied, eyes locked on the horizon. Below them, the sea boiled with the movements of the fleet, destroyers weaving, smoke trailing from the ones that had already been hit. The Bennington was repositioning east, trying to stay ahead of the suicide waves. They'd launched Connolly and Harris not as a strike mission, but as a desperate experiment. If the Tiny Tim could intercept the fast-moving kamikazes before they struck, it might give the fleet a fighting chance. The radio filled with frantic chatter. "Incoming!" Multiple bogies at 10 o'clock high. "Flak crews, open fire! Don't wait for ID!" Connolly banked left, the Corsair groaning under the weight of its load. Through the haze he saw them, dozens of Japanese planes diving in formation, each one aimed directly at the Allied fleet below. He throttled forward, the engine howling in protest. The Tiny Tims under his wings made the Corsair feel like it was dragging 2 anchors through the clouds. He'd only have one chance. These rockets weren't guided, they weren't meant for moving targets. But the enemy formation was so dense, so close together, that if he timed the launch right— "Thunder 2, break high," Connolly ordered. "I'll go low and take the shot." "Copy that," Harris answered. His Corsair peeled upward, vanishing into a bank of smoke. Connolly steadied his hand. Altitude, 3,500 feet. Range, closing fast. The Japanese planes filled his gun sight, small dark crosses against the glare. He wasn't aiming for a single target. He was aiming for fate itself. He dove. The altimeter spun. Wind shrieked through the frame. His thumb hovered over the trigger. At 1,800 feet, he fired both rockets. The Corsair jolted violently, almost pitching forward. Two tiny Tims streaked away in parallel trails of smoke, tails burning white. For an instant they seemed to wobble, and then they stabilized. The roar was deafening. The rockets tore through the air and detonated dead center in the oncoming formation. The explosion didn't just destroy one plane, it vaporized three. The shockwave ripped through the cluster, sending fragments and fire spiraling in every direction. The entire sky seemed to shatter into chaos. "Direct hit! You got them, Jack! You got them!" Harris shouted over the radio. Connolly pulled up hard, the Corsair's wings groaning under the strain. Black smoke rolled past his canopy. He caught a glimpse of flaming wreckage plunging toward the sea, Japanese aircraft breaking formation, the attack faltering. For the first time in weeks, the fleet below had breathing room. He circled wide, scanning for his wingman. "Thunder 2, status?" "Still flying," Harris replied, voice trembling. "Half the formation scattered, the rest are pulling off. You might have just saved the Bennington." Connolly let out a slow breath. The adrenaline hit him all at once. His muscles ached, his throat dry. He looked down at the gauges, fuel dropping fast, engine temperature high. He'd have to head back soon. But as he turned for home, his eyes caught something on the horizon. Two more Japanese aircraft flying low, skimming the waves. Not bombers, torpedo planes. And they were heading straight for the damaged destroyer guarding the fleet's flank. He flipped his safety cover open again. No rockets left, just his guns. "Thunder 2, see them?" he called. "Affirmative." "I'm out of ordnance." "Same here," Connolly muttered. "We'll have to run interference." He dove again, guns chattering. Tracers stitched the water, chasing the low-flying torpedo planes. One burst into flame and cartwheeled into the sea. The second dropped its torpedo before Connolly's rounds shredded its tail, sending it tumbling end over end into the waves. The torpedo streaked onward, straight toward the destroyer Halloran. "God damn it," Connolly hissed. He dove lower, desperate, following the white wake line slicing through the water. The destroyer's guns opened fire, trying to detonate it early. For a heartbeat, he thought they'd failed. Then, just before impact, the torpedo erupted in a blast of white foam, caught by a lucky shell hit. Connolly's chest collapsed with relief. The Halloran was safe. The fleet lived another hour. He pulled up, engines groaning. The sky was clearing now, black plumes drifting away, the ocean reflecting streaks of sunlight between patches of smoke. The kamikaze wave had been broken. "Thunder 2 to Thunder 1, Harris said softly. "That rocket of yours just saved 1,000 men." Connolly didn't answer. He was staring at the twin empty pylons under his wings, where the rockets had once hung. They'd been mocked, ridiculed, called dangerous, useless. Now they were the reason hundreds of sailors would see another sunrise. He banked toward the Bennington. The radio was alive with cheering voices, reports of the attack's collapse, and frantic damage counts from nearby ships. Below, the wreckage of burning planes dotted the waves like black petals. As the carrier came into view, Connolly felt something shift deep inside him. The fear that had haunted every mission was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a realization. Louis Feezer's toy rocket wasn't just a new weapon, it was a warning, a glimpse of a future where machines, not men, would decide battles in seconds. He didn't know it yet, but that morning over Okinawa had just marked the dawn of the missile age. The flight deck of the Bennington was chaos when Connolly's Corsair came in to land. The air still shimmered with heat from anti-aircraft bursts, the sea littered with burning debris. Sailors dragged twisted metal aside to clear the runway, while others shouted into field phones, reporting the wreckage and victories scattered across the ocean. Connolly's plane touched down hard, tires screeching. The deck crew sprinted forward, waving signals, guiding him into the recovery position. He powered down the engine and sat there for a long second, hands frozen on the throttle. The roar of the propeller faded into ringing silence. All that was left was the smell: burnt fuel, salt, and something faintly sweet from the rocket's exhaust that clung to the skin like smoke from a fire that wouldn't die. When he climbed down, the air was alive with tension. Mechanics rushed to his aircraft, running their hands over the scorched paint near the rocket mounts. Others stared at the cameras bolted to the fuselage, the ones that had captured every second of the new rocket's flight. "You actually fired both?" one of them asked, disbelief in his voice. Connolly nodded. "Both hit." Took half a formation with them. The mechanic whistled softly. "Hell," he said. "Maybe that thing really is the future." In the hangar below, Commander Riley was waiting with an intelligence officer and a pair of civilians wearing Navy research badges. Engineers flown in from California, members of FISA's original team. Their eyes were red from lack of sleep, their hands still ink-stained from the long journey. When Connolly entered, one of them stepped forward, a thin, bespectacled man with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Lieutenant Connolly, Caltech sends its thanks," he said, voice trembling between exhaustion and awe. "We were told the Tiny Tim worked, but seeing it on film—" Riley gestured toward the screen. "Roll it again." The projector whirred. The grainy film flickered to life, a black-and-white view from Connolly's wing camera. The horizon tilts, the dive begins, flak bursts across the frame. Then the rocket detaches, tail flame flaring, a spear of light tearing through the clouds. 1 second later, the frame goes white, an explosion so violent that the lens fogs with smoke. When the film ended, the room was silent. The engineer exhaled shakily. "That's it," he whispered. "That's what we've been building toward since 42. It's crude, unstable, but it works. It works." Riley leaned forward, eyes on the screen's after-image. "How far can you push it?" "Range is limited. Accuracy too," the engineer replied. "But we can scale it. With radar guidance, maybe one day, we won't even need a pilot." That sentence hung in the air. Connolly looked at him sharply. "No pilot?" he repeated. The man shrugged. "You've proven the concept, Lieutenant. The next step is control, guidance, automation. The weapon doesn't need courage, just trajectory." Connolly stared back at the blank screen, his reflection faint in the film's silver surface. The thought sent a chill through him. A war fought not by men but by machines. Rockets fired from beyond sight. Battles decided before anyone ever saw the enemy's face. Riley broke the silence. "For now, let's stick with pilots." The meeting dissolved into chatter, talk of production lines, logistics, redesigns. Connolly slipped out quietly, heading up toward the open deck. The afternoon sun blazed across the Pacific, turning the sea into molten silver. The remains of the morning's battle drifted in the distance. Life rafts, burning oil, twisted wings floating on waves. Rescue destroyers weaved between the wreckage, pulling survivors from the water. Connolly walked to the edge of the deck, helmet in hand. The wind hit his face hard, carrying the acrid scent of fuel and salt. Down below, the crash crews were hosing blood and soot from the planks. The war hadn't stopped for innovation. It just evolved faster than anyone could breathe. Behind him, the elevator rattled, the engineers emerging onto the deck, gesturing excitedly toward the distant sky, already talking about new angles, new fuels, new possibilities. Their words drifted across the wind, full of ambition and certainty. Connolly barely heard them. His gaze was locked on the horizon, where the smoke from the fallen destroyer still hung, a grey scar on the ocean's edge. He thought of Louis Fieser again, the man who built the weapon everyone laughed at. Somewhere in a quiet lab, he was probably already sketching improvements, dreaming of faster propulsion, higher velocity, bigger payloads. He'd be celebrated for genius, and he deserved it. But Connolly couldn't shake the memory of the men he'd watched burn in that explosion. It was strange, he thought, how quickly laughter could turn into reverence, and how easily reverence could turn into fear. A sailor approached and handed him a note from the bridge. It was a message from Fleet Command. Effective immediately, the Tiny Tim rocket authorized for full operational deployment. Caltech to begin mass production under Navy contract. He folded it carefully and looked back out to sea. The ocean shimmered like glass, hiding everything it had swallowed. Somewhere beneath that silence lay proof of what a single idea, once mocked, once dismissed, could do. Madness wins wars, Connolly muttered quietly, but it never ends them. He turned away from the rail as the sun dipped toward the water, the light turning red like flame over the horizon. The next wave of aircraft engines began to start up again, the hum of a new kind of war already in motion. By the time the sun slipped below the Pacific horizon, the Bennington was moving north again, her deck lights flickering in the wind. The clang of tools echoed through the hangars as mechanics rearmed the Corsairs with new batches of rockets, longer tubes, heavier warheads, faster ignition charges. The once experimental weapon was already becoming routine. Lieutenant Jack Connolly stood alone near the stern, the salt spray cold against his face. The night air smelled of oil and smoke, but for the first time in weeks there was no gunfire, no alarm, no shouting. Only the steady hum of engines below deck and the faint crackle of the ship's loudspeakers carrying distant music from the radio room. Somewhere, someone was playing Sentimental Journey. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark water. Every few seconds, faint flashes lit the horizon. Not gunfire, but lightning hidden deep inside distant storm clouds. The ocean glowed with reflections from the carrier's lights, soft and ghostly. It looked almost peaceful, though he knew better. Behind him, footsteps approached. Commander Riley stopped beside him, coffee in one hand, jacket unbuttoned against the wind. "You've been up here for hours," he said. "Couldn't sleep," Connolly replied. Riley took a slow sip. Word came through from command. Fieser's team is getting full funding. They're calling it a game changer. Connolly gave a small, tired laugh. They called it suicide 2 weeks ago. "War moves fast," Riley said, glancing toward the horizon. "One day you're a joke, the next day you're doctrine." He paused. "You did good work out there, Jack. You might have saved the fleet." Connolly didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the water, on the faint shimmer where the destroyer had sunk earlier that day. "You ever think," he asked quietly, "that maybe we just made something we shouldn't have?" Riley looked at him, frowning. "It's just a weapon, son. Tools win wars. We don't have the luxury of asking what they'll do afterward." Connolly nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Tools, yeah," he said, "until they start thinking for us." For a long time, neither man spoke. The carrier's deck rumbled under their feet as another launch cycle began. Engines whining, wings folding out, the rhythmic clank of chains and steel. Above them, the first stars began to pierce through the smoke. In the ready room below, engineers were already talking about guidance fins, gyroscopes, radio control. The words filtered through the corridor: precision, automation, future systems. The tiny Tim had done more than sink a destroyer. It had opened a door that could never be closed. Connolly finally turned away from the sea. "Madness wins wars," he murmured, echoing his own words from earlier, "but it always takes something with it." Riley watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. You'll need it. Tomorrow we fly again." When Connolly reached his quarters, the ship creaked and groaned softly, the sound of a living machine carrying thousands of souls through an endless war. He sat at the small metal desk, opened his flight log, and began to write. April 11th, 1945, Okinawa. Fired both rockets, impact confirmed. Target destroyed. Weapon unstable but effective. Recommend further testing. God help us if this is the future. He closed the book and set his pen down. Outside the porthole, lightning flashed again on the horizon, illuminating the black surface of the sea, for a moment revealing wreckage still burning far away. Connolly stared at it until the light faded. Then he whispered under his breath, "Not a prayer, not a confession, but a simple truth that only men who had seen too much could understand. Every victory costs more than it looks." The carrier engines droned on, pushing the Bennington through the night. The stars blurred in the exhaust haze, and somewhere far behind them, the ocean swallowed another piece of history. The tiny Tim would never be called a toy again.